It's funny how people love to call a marriage perfect just because both partners smile in pictures. Mine looked that way too. I was Elise Harper, 38, event designer, wife of a man everyone wanted to be. Nathaniel Harper, or Nate, the kind of CEO who always looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread. Perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect answers for reporters. I designed ballrooms and charity galas for a living, so I knew what perfect looked like. It's lighting, angles, and timing, nothing real, just carefully managed illusions. My marriage had all three. Every photo of Nate screamed success. Expensive suit, confident pose, beautiful company dinner. Every time a headline mentioned him, Summit Vale's visionary leader attends Aspen Investment Gala, I'd get texts from friends saying, "You must be so proud." And I was. At least I thought I was. Then one night, while editing a floor plan for a wedding, I had the TV on in the background. A local business channel was covering a charity gala. I wasn't really watching until I heard the anchor say, "Nathaniel Harper, CEO of Summit Vale Holdings, arrived tonight with his communications director, Brianna Lake." I looked up. There he was, my husband, walking across the red carpet. And there she was, the so-called communications director, young, blonde, polished. The kind of woman who always looks like she smells expensive. I stared at the screen, half expecting to hear, "And his wife, Elise." That part never came. Instead, the camera zoomed in as she laughed at something he said. He placed his hand lightly on her back, the same gesture he used with me when we were newly married, right before he'd whisper, "You did great tonight." Except tonight, I wasn't there. For a second, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe her job really did require her to be there. But deep down, I knew the truth. When you're a man like Nate Harper, image is currency. And apparently, I didn't fit the brand anymore. He came home late that night, smelling like champagne and ego. I asked, "How was the gala?" He said, "Busy. Long night. No mention of her. No apology. No guilt." I waited for him to say something, anything. He didn't. He kissed my cheek, said, "You should rest, babe," and walked into the shower like the world was fine. It wasn't the cheating that hit me first, it was the realization that he was no longer proud to stand next to me. That was worse than betrayal. I remember sitting on the couch, staring at our wedding photo. My hair was longer then. I looked happy. He looked proud. I tried to find that same man in the TV clip earlier, but he was gone. And the woman next to him? She fit perfectly into the frame he'd built for himself. The next morning, while making coffee, I asked casually, "Do you ever think people might notice you never take me to these events?" He smiled without looking up from his phone. "You know how those things go. It's work, Elise. You wouldn't enjoy them." I wanted to say, I design those things for a living. But what was the point? He wasn't listening. He was managing me like another part of his image kept neat, quiet, and out of sight. I laughed instead. "Right. Wouldn't want to ruin your lighting." He frowned slightly, but not enough to argue. That's the thing about men like Nate, they never fight about the truth. They just ignore it until you start doubting it yourself. Later that week, a mutual friend tagged him in another post, another event, another photo, another familiar face standing beside him. Same smile, same touch, same pattern. And every time, her name appeared where mine used to. That night, I poured a glass of wine and opened my laptop. I rewatched that first TV clip, not because I wanted to torture myself, but because I needed to see what everyone else saw. There it was, the picture of success. The man who built an empire, and the woman who made him look good doing it. Except that woman wasn't his wife. And the wife? She was sitting in her living room, watching it on a cheap TV, trying not to laugh at the irony. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, thinking, wow, I really made him look that good all these years, and he couldn't even give me a seat next to him. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be replaced without being divorced. You don't disappear overnight. You fade, little by little, until even you start wondering if you were ever really there. I shut the laptop, leaned back on the couch, and said out loud, "Perfect image, huh? Let's see how long it lasts." And that's when the real story began quietly, without tears, without warning. If you've ever looked at someone and realized you were standing next to a stranger, you'll understand. Leave me a comment if you've ever been made to feel invisible by someone who was supposed to love you. And if you want to hear how a perfect marriage unravels from the inside out, make sure you subscribe, I promise. You'll want to see how this one ends. He thought I wouldn't notice the pattern. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. The next morning, the house felt colder than usual, and it wasn't the weather. Nate was already dressed, pouring coffee like nothing in the world was wrong. He wore that same calm, polished look he saved for board meetings. I used to find it attractive. Now it felt like armor. He asked, "You're quiet this morning," without looking up. I said, "Maybe I'm finally learning from you." He didn't even smile, just grabbed his briefcase and said, "Dinner at 7, okay?" Except 7 turned into 9. 9 turned into a text. "Running late, don't wait up." That's how it started, the quiet kind of distance. No big argument, no slammed doors, just space that kept growing. I'd hear him on work calls, laughing, his tone lighter than it ever was with me. I could always tell when he was talking to her. His voice had a different kind of warmth, the kind that used to be mine. I stopped asking questions. Every time I did, he called me paranoid or dramatic. So I went silent. And let me tell you, silence makes men like Nate nervous. It takes away the script they're used to controlling. One Friday, he said he had another client dinner. I almost laughed. "Are you taking Brianna?" I asked. He blinked like I'd said something out of line. "She's part of the communications team. She manages PR events. Don't make this something it's not." I stirred my coffee. "Oh, I'm not. I think you already did." That weekend, he went on a business trip to Chicago. He said it was for meetings. His assistant said he was attending a private networking retreat. Guess who organized it? Brianna Lake. I saw the tag on her post before he had time to untag himself. When he came home, I didn't mention it. I cooked dinner, poured wine, and smiled like everything was fine. Because the moment you stop chasing explanations, you start seeing patterns. The next week, his company held a small reception for investors at a private club downtown. It wasn't a gala, just a quiet dinner for key clients. I wasn't invited, of course, but I showed up anyway. I walked in wearing the black dress he'd bought me years ago for his first company award. The receptionist stopped me at the door. "I'm sorry, ma'am. This is a private event. Guests must be on the list." "I'm Mrs. Harper," I said calmly. She checked. "No, Mrs. Harper. Just Nathaniel Harper and guest B. Lake." For a second, I just stood there, staring at the list. I smiled, thanked her, and left. Because there's no point fighting to enter a room where you've already been erased. That night, I waited for him to come home. He walked in smelling like expensive perfume that wasn't mine. I asked, "Did your meeting go well?" He said, "It's not really your thing, Elise. You wouldn't have enjoyed it." I wanted to laugh. My entire career revolved around planning events like that. But he wasn't talking about logistics, he meant image. He meant I wouldn't have looked the part standing next to him and her. Later, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked presentable, not glamorous, not flashy, just me. And for the first time, I felt small in my own house. Like furniture, useful but unnoticed. That weekend, I met up with an old client for lunch. She asked politely, "Will Nate be joining us?" I saw pictures of him at that Summit Vale dinner. The woman next to him, was that your assistant? I froze for half a second before answering, "No, that's the new PR director." She smiled awkwardly, realizing she'd stepped into something uncomfortable. "Oh, she looks very involved." I smiled back. "She is." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to a man who was physically there but emotionally elsewhere. The only sound was the quiet hum of his phone, lighting up with messages after midnight. He turned it face down when he noticed me looking. I said nothing. Instead, I got up, went to my office, and opened my journal, the one I hadn't touched in years. I wrote one line. "If you have to ask to be seen, you're already invisible." The next morning, he acted like everything was normal. He made pancakes, joked about traffic, kissed my forehead before leaving. It was almost impressive how easily he could pretend. And maybe that was the moment I realized. He didn't just cheat with another woman. He cheated with the life he wanted to have. The kind where I didn't exist. When you've been with someone long enough, you can tell when their love shifts from being proud of you to being embarrassed by you. He stopped introducing me to people, stopped mentioning my name in interviews. I used to decorate the events his company hosted. Now, I wasn't even invited. That night, I sat outside on the patio, sipping wine and listening to the faint sound of traffic below. It hit me that I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just detached. Like watching a movie I used to care about. And in that stillness, something changed. I realized I didn't have to scream, or beg, or demand a place in his world. I just had to decide whether I wanted to stay in it. The sound of his car pulling into the driveway snapped me out of it. He came inside, loosened his tie, kissed my cheek automatically. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Perfect," I said, smiling. "Just perfect." He believed me, of course he did. He'd trained himself to hear only what kept him comfortable. But inside, I'd already stopped being the woman waiting at home. Because once you know you've been erased, the next step is deciding whether you'll let them keep the pen. The silence between us stopped feeling awkward. It became normal, like furniture you don't notice anymore. Nate had his world-late meetings, PR dinners, weekend strategy retreats. I had mine, clients, coffee, and pretending I didn't know what he was doing. He got better at hiding things. Or maybe he just stopped caring if I noticed. Every time his phone buzzed, he tilted it away like a reflex. Once, I caught a glimpse of her name on the screen. Brianna L. That period at the end made me laugh inside like she wanted to sound professional while wrecking someone's marriage. There's something humiliating about knowing, yet still pretending you don't. It's a quiet kind of pain. The kind where you wash the same dishes twice just so you don't think too much. A few weeks later, Summitvale hosted an industry luncheon. My designs had been used for that venue the year before. I didn't attend this time, but the photos were everywhere on business sites, social media, even local magazines. And in every picture, there they were. Him, her, standing side by side. Perfect smiles, coordinated outfits, the matching energy of people who wanted to be noticed together. The caption under one photo read, "Nathaniel Harper, CEO of Summitvale Holdings, and his PR director, Brianna Lake, a rising star in corporate communications." No mention of me, of course. I remember scrolling through the comments. What a power couple. They look amazing together. She's stunning. I closed my laptop and laughed quietly. It wasn't the kind of laughter that comes from humor. It was the kind that tastes like disbelief. Later that night, he came home cheerful, humming under his breath. He said, "The event went great. Investors loved it." I replied, "I could tell. You looked very comfortable." He looked up, eyes narrowing. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Oh, nothing," I said. "Just that Brianna photographs well." He froze, then smirked. "Don't be jealous, Elise. You know how media is." I said, "Right. They always make it look like something it's not." But the thing was, it was exactly what it looked like. After that, I stopped asking anything. Questions give men like Nate room to lie, and I didn't need more fiction in my house. One evening, we attended a small charity dinner, one of the rare times he asked me to join. I spent the night sitting next to strangers while Nate worked the room, shaking hands and flashing smiles. When he introduced me, it was always the same. "This is Elise." No, my wife. Just a name, as if I were a +1 he barely remembered inviting. At one point, someone asked me what I did. Before I could answer, Nate cut in. "She does design stuff." Design stuff. After 15 years of work, awards, and clients, I was reduced to stuff. I smiled politely while he kept talking, and for a brief second, I saw Brianna across the room. She was staring at me, not with guilt, not even with pity. Just that smug, curious look people give when they're sure they've won. When we got home, I poured myself a drink. He loosened his tie and said, "You were quiet tonight." I said, "I didn't want to ruin your performance." He sighed. "You're overthinking again. Brianna's just good at what she does. She helps me manage the company's image. I looked at him and said, "Yeah, I can see that. She's very hands-on." He didn't even deny it, just grabbed his phone and walked into his office. The next day, while scrolling through a business site, I saw a feature. The faces behind Summit Vale's success. There was Nate's photo again. And there she was, right next to him, her hand brushing his arm, both of them smiling. Underneath, the article said, "Harper and Lake are known for their undeniable synergy and shared vision." Shared vision. I couldn't have written a better euphemism if I tried. That evening, an old friend texted me, "Hey, just saw the article? Are you two still together? Thought you'd split. Sorry if that's weird." I stared at the screen for a while, then typed back, "No worries. Happens all the time." How? I set the phone down and realized something. I'd been erased so quietly, the world didn't even notice I was gone. The next morning, Nate left early for another event. I cleaned up the kitchen, watered the plants, went through the motions. But inside, something felt done. Not broken, not shattered, just done. I didn't even wait for him to come home before opening my laptop and starting a new client proposal. Work was the only place I still existed. That night, while reviewing invoices, I got an email notification, a photo attachment from one of my old assistants who still freelanced for Summit Vale. The subject line said, "You should see this." I opened it. It was a picture from that night's gala. Nate, in his tuxedo, holding a glass of champagne. Brianna next to him, her hand resting casually on his arm. His wedding ring wasn't there. I stared at it for a long time, not because it surprised me, but because it didn't. I printed the photo, placed it on the counter, and looked at it while I poured another glass of wine. I thought about how hard I'd worked to build a life that made him look good. The dinner parties, the quiet support, the polished smile every time someone said, "You're lucky to have him." And then I thought about how easily he'd replaced me in that same picture. When he came home, I didn't mention it. I didn't have to. I'd already stopped being the audience to his performance. The next morning, I found the photo still lying there, a coffee ring soaking through the edge of the paper. It looked fitting somehow. Imperfect, human, real. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the one who should be ashamed. By the time the Aspen Gala rolled around, I had stopped pretending I didn't know what was happening. Nate had been talking about it for weeks, the most important night of the year. He was nervous, distracted, constantly checking his phone. When I asked if I should clear my weekend to go with him, he said, "This one's mostly investors and partners, Elise. It's work, not social." I nodded, the way I always did when he wanted to shut down a conversation. But something in me decided I was going anyway. I didn't tell him that part. The night of the gala, I took my time getting ready. Not because I wanted to impress him, I just wanted to feel like myself again. I put on a long black dress, the one he once said made me look too serious. Perfect. Serious was exactly what I needed to be. The drive to Aspen took 3 hours. Snow had started to fall, light and steady, like the world was trying to stay quiet for what was about to happen. When I arrived, the hotel glowed under string lights. Expensive cars lined the entrance, and photographers waited outside, lenses ready for the next flash of importance. I walked up to the registration desk, gave my name, and smiled. The woman looked at her list, then at me. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harper. I don't see your name here." I leaned in slightly. "Try again. Elise Harper." She scrolled, lips tightening. "I have Nathaniel Harper, but he's listed with a guest, B. Lake." For a second, I thought I'd misheard. But no. The sound of her voice was clear, calm, professional, completely detached from the reality she'd just dropped in front of me. I managed to say, "Thank you," as if I'd just been told my dinner reservation was delayed. I turned around, walked out to the main lobby, and stood behind a column where I could see the entrance. 10 minutes later, the cameras started flashing. Nate stepped out of a black SUV, smiling like the man on every magazine cover. And there she was, Brianna standing next to him in a gold dress, her hand on his arm. They posed perfectly in sync, practiced and polished, like they'd rehearsed every move. He didn't look uncomfortable. He didn't look guilty. He looked proud. Something in me went still. I didn't cry, didn't panic. I just watched as they walked into the ballroom together, his hand gently resting on the small of her back the same way he used to guide me through crowded rooms. It wasn't rage I felt, it was clarity. A cold, precise kind of understanding that once someone decides you don't belong in their world, you can't argue your way back in. I walked outside, into the cold night air. The snow was heavier now, covering everything in soft white layers. My car was parked across the street. I sat inside for a while, watching the light from the ballroom shimmer through the windows. Laughter spilled out every time the door opened. Somewhere inside, my husband was probably raising a glass and giving a speech about integrity and leadership. I pulled out my phone, opened his messages, and stared at our last conversation. It was all logistics. Schedules, bills, groceries. Not a single word that sounded like a marriage. I typed one short text. I saw you. You don't have to explain. Then I deleted it. Some things don't deserve a reaction. After a few minutes, I started the car. The windshield wipers pushed away the snow as I drove down the mountain road. The farther I got from the lights of Aspen, the calmer I felt. The road curved through quiet forests, and for the first time in years, there was nothing left to fix. When I reached Denver, it was almost midnight. The city lights were dull compared to Aspen's sparkle, but they felt honest. I parked, went upstairs, and sat on the couch. The house was dark, except for the streetlight coming through the blinds. His suit jacket was draped over a chair, his cufflinks still on the counter. Evidence of a man who'd left in a hurry to impress strangers. I opened the drawer of the coffee table and pulled out an old photo album. It had dust on it. The first picture inside was from our wedding, Nate and me, both smiling, both stupidly confident that love was enough to keep people honest. I flipped through more pages, vacations, anniversaries, business dinners, all the moments that had looked perfect from the outside. Every one of them felt like a lie now, but oddly, I didn't hate them. They just didn't belong to me anymore. After a while, I grabbed a piece of stationery and a pen. I didn't plan it, but the words came easily. You didn't have to hide me to protect your image. You could have stood beside me and made both of us stronger. But you chose the spotlight alone. Keep it. I folded the note neatly and placed it on his pillow. No drama, no signature, just silence with sharp edges. Before heading to bed, I poured myself a glass of water and looked around the apartment. It was beautiful, expensive, curated to impress the same way he lived. But it wasn't mine anymore. I was just another thing that fit the image, until I didn't. The clock ticked past 1 in the morning. I turned off the lights and lay down, not even bothering to take off my makeup. I didn't need to look perfect for anyone anymore. Somewhere in the distance, I heard his key turn in the door. The sound was faint, slow, like someone who didn't want to wake the person they'd already left behind. I didn't move. He came in, paused by the hallway, and whispered my name once, testing if I was awake. I kept my eyes closed. The silence said everything that words couldn't. He stood there for a long time before finally walking away. The door to the guest room closed softly, and that was it. That's how a marriage ends sometimes. Not with a fight, not with tears, but with two people breathing the same air, pretending they're strangers in the same house. The next morning, sunlight was spilling across the marble floors when I woke up. For a second, I almost forgot what had happened. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you realize you've been living in noise for years. Nate's office door was closed. His coat was gone. His phone charger was still in the outlet, like a reminder that he'd be back, but only out of habit. I walked into the kitchen. The smell of last night's cologne still hung in the air, faint but sharp. There was a champagne cork in the trash, his tie on the counter, and my note sitting exactly where I'd left it on his pillow. I wondered if he'd even read it, or if he'd just thrown it away. Knowing Nate, he probably folded it neatly, tucked it in a drawer, and convinced himself it meant nothing. I made coffee, sat at the table, and stared at my reflection in the window. The woman looking back didn't seem shocked anymore, just done pretending. That's when I realized I didn't want to argue or demand an apology. I wanted distance. I opened my laptop and started typing something practical for the first time in weeks, a resignation email. I'd been freelancing with a few companies, mostly through Nate's connections. I couldn't stand the idea of being tied to him, even professionally. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I finally wrote, "Thank you for the opportunity. I'll be pursuing other projects moving forward." No drama, no explanation, just clean lines, like cutting a thread. Around noon, Nate came downstairs, dressed in casual clothes, pretending to check his phone like it was an ordinary Saturday. "You're up early," he said. "I didn't sleep much," I replied. He poured coffee like we were a normal couple, sharing a quiet morning. "We need to talk about last night." I raised an eyebrow. "Do we?" He looked uncomfortable. "Elise, these events are complicated. You wouldn't understand how optics work." I cut him off. "Optics? Is that what you call taking your mistress to a company event?" He froze, then sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You're blowing this out of proportion. She's part of my team." "Your team," I repeated. "Sure. Is that what you're calling it now?" He didn't respond. Just stood there, lips pressed tight, waiting for me to calm down. I didn't. I set my mug down and said quietly, "I left you a note. Did you read it?" He nodded. "I did." "And?" He exhaled. "You're emotional right now. We both need space." I smiled at that. Finally, something we agree on. I walked past him, grabbed my purse, and opened the door. "Where are you going?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "Somewhere with better optics." I didn't slam the door. I just let it close behind me. The soft click was enough. I got in the car, drove aimlessly through the city, and ended up at a small park near our first apartment. I used to walk there with him when he was still the kind of man who reached for my hand without checking if someone was watching. I sat on a bench for a long time, just breathing. Then I took out my phone and called Tara Monroe, my old friend from college, the one person who always said what she meant. She picked up on the first ring. "Elise? You sound off? What happened?" I laughed. A short, dry laugh. "My husband took his PR manager to a gala. I wasn't invited." End of quote. There was a pause. Then her voice sharpened. "You're kidding." "I wish I was." "Where are you now?" "In a park. Trying not to scream in public." "Then come here," she said. "Santa Fe. I have a guest room. No explanations, just pack and drive." It wasn't a dramatic decision. It just made sense. I'd built an entire life around a man who no longer saw me, and staying would only make me smaller. That evening, I went home and started packing. I didn't bother organizing. I took what mattered: my laptop, my sketchbooks, a few dresses, and the small wooden jewelry box my mother gave me. Everything else could stay with him. As I packed, I found a stack of old thank you cards from clients. One of them said, "Your designs made our night unforgettable." I smiled. At least something I created had lasted. When Nate came home later, he stopped at the doorway. "You're packing?" "Yeah," I said, folding another sweater. "I'm heading to Santa Fe for a while." "Oh? Are you serious?" I looked up. "When have you known me to joke about this kind of thing?" He frowned. "You're being impulsive." "No," I said, zipping my bag. "I'm being sane." He stepped closer. "Elise, don't do something you'll regret." I met his eyes. "I already did. I married you." The silence that followed was heavy, but not painful. It felt like air returning to a place that had been suffocating. I walked to the table, picked up my keys, and set down another note. Shorter this time. "Don't call. Don't explain. Just remember what you traded." I walked out the door with my suitcase. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was survival. The drive to Santa Fe was long but peaceful. The highway stretched for miles, and with every mile, the weight in my chest got lighter. By the time the city skyline disappeared behind me, I realized something: freedom doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it's just a quiet exit that no one sees coming. When I reached Tara's house, she was standing on the porch, arms crossed, wearing an oversized sweatshirt and the same no-nonsense look she'd had in college. She hugged me, no questions asked, and said, "You're staying as long as you need." I nodded. For the first time in a long time, I didn't have to perform. I didn't have to smile for anyone's camera. Inside, she poured me wine and said, "So what's next?" I looked out the window at the desert sky, a quiet kind of beautiful. "I'm not sure yet," I said. "But whatever it is, it'll have my name on it." And with that, something in me finally stopped breaking. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight flooding through unfamiliar curtains. Tara's guest room smelled like coffee and cedar, the kind of smell that feels like safety. For a few seconds, I just lay there, listening to the quiet hum of the ceiling fan. No ringing phones, no footsteps pacing the hall, no voice rehearsing a perfect excuse. It's strange how peace feels uncomfortable at first, when you've been living in chaos for too long. Tara had already made breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and enough sarcasm to fill the silence. She didn't tiptoe around the subject either. "So, how's Mr. Image Management?" she asked, sliding me a cup of coffee. "Probably standing in front of a mirror, practicing sincerity," I said. She laughed. "Good. You still have humor. That's a good sign." After breakfast, she handed me a notepad. "Here," she said. "Write down what you want next. No rules, no fear, no him." I stared at the blank page for a while. It was harder than I thought. For years, everything I wanted revolved around what would make us look good. His events, his reputation, his rise. I didn't even know what my own voice sounded like anymore. So, I wrote one word: freedom. Then another: design. Then finally, me. That afternoon we drove around Santa Fe. The city had this warm, grounded energy, red clay, blue skies, art on every corner. It didn't care about reputation or optics, it just existed, unapologetically beautiful. Tara pointed to a vacant studio space downtown. "Used to be a boutique," she said. "You could do something with that." I laughed. "Do what? Sell candles?" She shrugged. "Or start your own design studio. You're good enough, Elise. You've just been too busy making other people look successful." End of treat. The idea stayed in my head all day. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the quiet street, and something inside me clicked. I'd been designing for other people's visions for so long that I forgot I could create my own. The next morning, I called a real estate agent. Within a week, I had signed a short-term lease on that little studio. The place was dusty, the windows needed cleaning, and the floor creaked like it had stories of its own, but it felt right. I called it Luma Design Studio, after the word illuminate. I figured it was time I stopped living in someone else's shadow. Setting it up wasn't easy. I didn't have investors or a team, just a laptop, my portfolio, and Tara's old coffee maker. But every brushstroke, every draft, every sleepless night made me feel alive again. I built a small website, uploaded my work, sent out cold emails to past clients. A few responded, curious to see what Elise Harper Designs was all about. It started small wedding layouts, boutique interiors, rebranding projects for women-owned businesses. I didn't charge much at first, but it wasn't about the money. It was about taking back ownership of my talent. One afternoon, I got a message from an old colleague. "Heard you started something new. Proud of you." It wasn't much, but it made me smile. For once, people were saying my name without his attached to it. Meanwhile, I didn't hear from Nate. Not a text, not a call. He must have thought my silence meant defeat. But silence, when used right, is power. It confuses people who live on attention. Tara noticed how calm I'd become. "You're glowing," she said one night while we were having dinner. "Glowing?" I asked. "I think that's just relief." "Same thing," she replied. "You look like someone who stopped waiting for permission." She was right. For the first time in years, I didn't check my phone to see if I mattered to someone. I didn't measure my worth through the reflection of a man who needed applause. By the end of that first month, I landed a big client, a wellness resort that wanted a full event redesign. They gave me total creative freedom. I poured everything I had into it. When the event photos went live, people started tagging my name. It felt surreal seeing my work recognized not as a background to someone else's glory, but as my own. That night, I celebrated with Tara on her porch. She poured wine, handed me a glass, and said, "To rebuilding." I clinked glasses with her. To remembering who I was before him. It wasn't all perfect. There were moments when loneliness crept in, nights when I'd catch myself wondering if he even noticed I was gone. But those thoughts faded quickly, replaced by something better: peace. One evening, as I was locking up the studio, a new client stopped by, a woman in her 50s, kind eyes, wearing a wedding ring but carrying a sadness I recognized. She said softly, "I heard you help women design spaces that feel like a new start." I smiled. That's the goal. She looked around the studio, tears forming. Then, maybe this is where I should begin. I didn't need to ask what she'd been through. You can spot heartbreak in someone who's already survived it. After she left, I stood in the middle of my studio and realized something simple but powerful. Healing doesn't always come from revenge, it comes from creation. From building something that no one can take credit for but you. That night, I got an email. From Nate. Subject line, "We need to talk." I didn't open it. I just stared at it for a while, then moved it to the archive folder. Because finally, I didn't need his words to define the story anymore. The studio lights glowed softly against the window, reflecting the quiet woman who had built her own piece, one design, one decision at a time. It's funny how even when you move on, the past still finds its way into the room. It doesn't knock, it just shows up, disguised as someone saying his name. A month into running Luma Design Studio, I was sitting in a cafe downtown, sketching layouts for a client, when two women at the next table started talking about Summit Vale Holdings. I wasn't eavesdropping, at least. Not intentionally, but the second I heard the name, my stomach tightened. "Did you see that article about Nate Harper?" one of them said. "He and that PR girl are basically running the whole industry now." The other replied, "Yeah, they're like the new power couple. She's gorgeous. He's lucky." I didn't turn around. I didn't say a word. I just kept drawing lines that didn't connect, pretending my hand wasn't shaking. The PR girl. That's what I'd been replaced with, a headline. Friendly accessory. When I got back to the studio, I sat there staring at my designs, realizing how much of my career had once been built on his last name. Harper had opened doors, impressed clients, gotten invitations. Now, that same name felt like a stain I was trying to wash off. I thought about changing my last name back to my maiden one, Bennett, but part of me didn't want to erase the record of what I'd survived. So instead, I reclaimed it. Elise Harper, not his version, mine. That week, I got a call from a local magazine that wanted to feature women entrepreneurs in Santa Fe. The editor said, "Your work stood out, especially how you focus on women rebuilding their lives. It's empowering." I almost laughed. Empowering wasn't the word I would have used back then. Exhausting, maybe. Necessary, definitely. But I said yes. When the article came out, it was titled, "Designing Peace: How One Woman Turned Betrayal into a Business." They even photographed me in the studio, sunlight pouring through the window, paint samples spread out around me. It didn't feel staged, it felt real. A few days later, my phone started buzzing with messages from old acquaintances. "Saw your feature, so proud of you. You're glowing, Elise." And one that made me pause. "Funny how success looks better on you than it ever did on him." I smiled at that one. Quiet victories always taste sweeter. But, of course, the universe loves irony. Because the day after that article came out, I got a message from a new number. "Congratulations on the magazine feature. You look beautiful, Nate." I stared at it for a full minute before putting the phone down. No anger, no shaking hands, just a strange kind of pity. He'd seen my success and wanted to remind me that he still existed. That night, Tara noticed I was quieter than usual. "Don't tell me Mr. PR messaged you." I nodded. She rolled her eyes. "He'll only show up when he thinks you've moved on. That's their favorite game." "I'm not playing," I said. "Good," she replied. "Because the best revenge is being genuinely uninterested." She was right. A week later, I attended a business networking mixer, my first big public event since leaving Denver. I almost turned around twice before walking in. But once inside, something shifted. I was no longer the woman standing next to her husband, smiling for the camera. I was the woman people came to talk to. Halfway through the night, a man approached me, mid-40s, kind face, architect from Albuquerque. He said, You're the one who designed the Luma studio space, right? My wife showed me your article. I smiled. That's me. He nodded approvingly. Impressive. My firm might need someone with your eye for detail. We talked for 20 minutes about architecture, design, and the kind of patience it takes to rebuild from the ground up. There was no flirting, no tension, just respect. It was refreshing. Driving home later, I caught myself humming to the radio. I couldn't remember the last time I'd done that. Maybe peace had a soundtrack after all. The next morning, I checked my inbox. There were 2 new client inquiries and 1 from Summit Vale Holdings. My heart stopped for a second. The message was formal, sent by their assistant. Subject: Event Collaboration Proposal. Dear Miss Harper, Summit Vale Holdings will be sponsoring the Women in Design Charity Ball this year. We are looking for independent design professionals to collaborate on the event space. Your name was highly recommended. Please let us know if you'd be interested in discussing this opportunity further. I read it twice. 3 times. It was almost funny, his company, his world, reaching out to me like I was just another talented stranger. Tara found me sitting at my desk, half smiling, half stunned. Why do you look like someone just offered you a front row seat to poetic justice? I turned the screen toward her. She read it, then laughed. You've got to take it. I don't know. Elise, come on. You wouldn't even have to say anything. Just showing up would be enough. She wasn't wrong. That night, I poured a glass of wine and thought about it. I didn't want revenge, not the kind that hurts people. I just wanted truth. I wanted to stand in the same room where I'd once been erased and exist so boldly that even he couldn't pretend not to see me. I wrote back, Dear Summit Vale team, thank you for reaching out. I'd be honored to collaborate on the event. Best, Elise Harper, Luma Design Studio. I clicked send and leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Outside, the desert night stretched wide and calm. I could almost hear the echo of my old life fading behind me, replaced by something steadier, quieter, stronger. Whatever came next, I wasn't the hidden wife anymore. I was the woman who built something out of silence, and that was enough. The email didn't feel like fate, it felt like paperwork. Just another message sitting between invoices and supplier updates. But when I read the words, Women in Design Charity Ball sponsored by Summit Vale Holdings, something inside me went still. A year ago, I would have been designing that event under Nate's direction, following his color palettes and branding notes. Now, they were asking me as an outsider, as Elise Harper of Luma Studio, to design it my way. I accepted without hesitation, not out of revenge, not even pride, but because it felt like the final test of everything I'd rebuilt. The first planning meeting was scheduled for the following week at the Summit Vale headquarters in Denver. Just the thought of walking back into that building made my chest tighten, but I'd already learned something crucial. Fear loses its power when you stop running from it. The morning of the meeting, I wore a cream blazer and simple gold earrings, the kind of understated confidence that doesn't need to announce itself. I drove through the familiar streets, past the same high-rise glass towers I used to see from the passenger seat of Nate's car. Except this time, the view looked different. This time, I wasn't the accessory. The lobby looked exactly as I remembered, cold, elegant, impersonal. The receptionist smiled when I introduced myself. Luma Studio, right? We've been expecting you. Funny. For years, I'd been invisible in that same space. Now my name was on their schedule. When I walked into the conference room, the air changed. It wasn't dramatic, just a flicker of surprise in a few faces. And then I saw him, Nate, standing by the window, hands in his pockets, talking to someone from the event committee. He looked almost the same. Still well-groomed, still confident. But there was something off. His posture was stiffer, the charm a little too forced. Success can't cover guilt forever. It just delays the moment it starts showing. He turned, mid-sentence, and froze when he saw me. Elise? I smiled politely. Good morning, Nathaniel. The way I said his full name caught him off guard. He cleared his throat. You're consulting on the event? Designing it, I said. Luma Studio was invited. The silence that followed was the kind that fills a room without making a sound. The committee chair quickly jumped in, pretending not to notice the tension. Yes, we're thrilled to have her. Miss Harper's work has been highly recommended across several projects. Miss Harper. That was new. And it landed exactly how I wanted it to. The meeting went on smoothly. I presented a few design ideas, modern lines, soft lighting, a color palette built around balance and renewal. Every time I spoke, Nate kept his eyes on the table, occasionally glancing at me like he couldn't decide if he wanted to apologize or defend himself. When the meeting ended, the others filed out, leaving just the two of us. He spoke first. "You look different." "I am," I said. "I saw your article," he continued. "You've done well." "Thank you," I said. "Turns out, not being hidden is good for business." He flinched slightly, then laughed in that hollow, nervous way people do when they realize they've lost the upper hand. "I deserved that." "Probably," I replied. He hesitated, then added, "Brianna doesn't work here anymore." I looked at him, unimpressed. That must make for an awkward press release. She moved on, he said quickly. "Good for her," I said. "We all move on eventually." He nodded, silent for a moment. "I'm glad you're doing well, Elise." "I know," I said simply, then gathered my notes and walked out. In the elevator, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. I wasn't trembling, wasn't angry, just calm. That calm that comes when you've already survived the worst version of someone. Over the next few weeks, I worked closely with the charity committee, finalizing details for the ball. Every time an email came from Summit Vale, it was formal, polite, efficient. There were no personal notes from Nate, just signatures and approval lines. It was almost funny how professional he could be when there were witnesses. The event started to take shape. The venue was a glass atrium overlooking the mountains, all silver light and open space. I chose a theme called Reclaiming Light. I told the team it was about women rediscovering confidence after loss, though I didn't mention mine. When I shared the concept at the final design review, the room went quiet. One of the committee members said softly, "That's beautiful, Elise. Feels personal." I smiled. "It is." The week before the gala, Tara flew in from Santa Fe to help. She walked through the venue with me, arms crossed, appraising my work like an art critic. "It's stunning," she said finally. "You realize you've built the stage for your own redemption story, right?" "I didn't plan it that way." "Sure you didn't," she teased, smirking. "But life's got good timing." On the night before the event, I stayed late, adjusting details. As the staff cleared out, I stood in the middle of the empty hall, surrounded by soft golden lights. The air was quiet, except for the faint echo of my footsteps. I thought about that night in Aspen, the one where he'd taken Brianna instead of me. The cameras, the laughter, the humiliation. And now here I was, designing a night where I wouldn't need to be announced. The room itself would speak for me. When I finally locked up and stepped outside, the sky was a deep indigo. Stars scattered like a reminder that light exists, even after the darkest seasons. I got in my car, started the engine, and smiled to myself. Tomorrow would be just another event to everyone else. But for me, it would be something entirely different. A quiet return to the world that once erased me. And this time, no one would have the power to make me disappear. The morning of the gala began the way every big event does: too early, too bright, and with a line of texts asking for last-minute changes. I was already at the venue before sunrise, walking through the space with my clipboard and coffee, checking the lighting one more time. Every inch of that ballroom carried my fingerprint. The archways of soft white roses, the muted gold uplighting, the minimalist stage design that whispered elegance instead of shouting it. I had worked on dozens of events before, but this one felt different. It wasn't just decoration, it was quiet power. Every beam of light, every chair placement, every detail said, "I'm here now. I built this." The staff moved smoothly around me, adjusting drapes and polishing glassware. I liked how no one asked who I was in relation to the company. They just knew I was the one in charge. Around mid-morning, the event coordinator rushed over, phone in hand. "Summit Vale's CEO just arrived," she said. "He wants to do a quick walkthrough." I didn't flinch. "That's fine. Let him see what actual class looks like." A few minutes later, I heard his voice behind me. I didn't turn immediately. I let him walk closer, Let the sound of his polished shoes echo through the room before I finally turned around. Nate looked exactly the same, but the room made him smaller. He was used to being the center of attention, but here, surrounded by something he hadn't created, he looked out of place. He stopped in front of me, hands in his pockets. "You've outdone yourself." "Thank you," I said evenly. "It's amazing what people can do when no one's hiding them." He gave a tight smile. "Still sharp as ever. And still good at pretending you're comfortable," I replied. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was thick enough to cut. Then he said quietly, "You know, I didn't think you'd actually take this job." "I didn't take it for you," I said. "I took it for the women who get erased by men who think they're doing them a favor." He nodded, as if he deserved to understand what that meant. "I regret how things ended." "Do you?" I asked. "Because regret sounds a lot like wanting forgiveness without doing the work." He shifted uncomfortably. "Brianna's gone. She left the company months ago." "Anodo. I'm sure she saw the expiration date before you did," I said. "But don't worry, I'm not here to relive that part." He looked at me for a long time. "You've changed." "Good," I said. "It means I learned something." He didn't respond. Just stood there, studying me like I was a painting he didn't have the right to touch anymore. Then, before leaving, he said softly, "You look happy, Elise." "I am," I said. "And that's the part you'll never get credit for." "Oh." After he walked out, I exhaled, feeling something uncoil inside me. It wasn't triumph. It was freedom, the kind that doesn't need an audience. By the time the evening rolled around, the ballroom was glowing. Guests arrived in glittering gowns and tailored suits, glasses of champagne catching the light. The hum of polite laughter filled the air. I moved through the crowd quietly, checking details but mostly observing. Nate was there, of course, making his usual rounds, smiling for cameras, shaking hands. The same polished act I'd once memorized. But something had changed. When people spoke to him, their eyes drifted past him toward the room, toward the beauty of it all. My work had outshined his presence, and he knew it. Halfway through the night, the host went on stage to give a brief introduction. "This year's Women in Design Charity Ball is especially meaningful," she said. "We'd like to thank the brilliant mind behind tonight's design, Elise Harper from Luma Studio." Applause filled the room. I wasn't expecting it, but it rolled over me like a soft wave. People turned toward me, smiling, clapping. I nodded politely, heart steady, not racing. Across the room, Nate froze. The applause that once belonged to him now belonged to the woman he tried to hide. Our eyes met for a second. His expression wasn't anger, it was realization. The kind that cuts deeper than guilt ever could. After the speech, people came up to compliment me. A few even asked for business cards. I kept my composure, smiling, engaging, the way professionals do when they've earned the moment. Later, during dessert, I stepped out to the terrace for some air. The night was crisp, the mountains dark silhouettes under the stars. The door opened behind me. "I thought I'd find you here," Nate said. I didn't turn around. "You always liked sneaking up when I wasn't looking." He sighed. "You made the night unforgettable. That was the goal." He stepped closer. "Do you ever think about us?" I turned then, meeting his eyes. "No. I think about who I used to be around you and how much I like her being gone." He swallowed hard, eyes dropping for a moment. "I ruined something good." "No," I said softly. "You ruined something convenient. You never saw me as your equal, you saw me as an accessory. And when I stopped fitting the image, you traded me for someone who matched the decor." He didn't deny it. He just stood there, looking like a man who finally realized the size of his own emptiness. I finished my drink and set the glass down. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, Nate. You can tell the photographers I said thank you for the lighting, it's perfect this time." I walked back inside, leaving him standing alone on the terrace, the hum of the gala fading behind me. The rest of the night was a blur of soft laughter and music, but I remember one thing clearly. As I watched the lights shimmer across the floor, I felt a sense of stillness I hadn't known in years. It wasn't victory, it wasn't revenge. It was peace, and that was enough. The morning after the gala, I woke up to sunlight cutting through the curtains of my hotel room. For a moment, I didn't move. The night before replayed in my head, not as drama, but as quiet satisfaction. The applause, the faces turning toward me, the calm look I gave Nate when he tried to start a conversation, it all felt like closure wrapped in grace. Tara called before I even finished my first cup of coffee. "I saw the coverage," she said, her voice full of mischief. "You looked incredible. And the event? Flawless. You should have seen social media last night." "I try not to," I said, laughing softly. "Well, too late. You're trending in the business section. People are talking about Luma Studio like it's the new big thing. Even Summit Vale posted a thank you without mentioning your ex's name, by the way." I didn't respond right away. I just smiled, sipping my coffee, while watching the city below come to life. For years, Nate had been the public face, and I'd been the background. Now, the roles had reversed, and the irony didn't even sting. It just felt balanced. By noon, my inbox was overflowing with new inquiries. A few media outlets wanted interviews, several brands wanted consultations, and mixed among them were messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Clients who once treated me like a CEO's wife. Acquaintances who'd gone silent when the marriage fell apart. Every message started the same way. "I'm so happy to see you thriving." The truth was, they weren't happy for me. They were fascinated by how well I'd landed on my feet. People love redemption stories, especially when they involve a woman rising from the ashes of someone else's ego. That evening, I drove back to Santa Fe. The desert always had a way of clearing my head. The roads were long and open, and as the sunset painted the horizon, I felt the weight of everything I'd carried finally lift. When I arrived, Tara was waiting with takeout and 2 glasses of wine. She held one up and said, "To poetic justice." I clinked her glass. "To peace disguised as revenge." She grinned. "That's going on your studio's wall." We ate on the porch, the air cool and quiet. I told her about the night, the way Nate looked when he realized I'd built something bigger than his approval. "You know what I loved most?" I said. "He didn't see it coming. He thought the worst thing I could do was leave. Turns out, the worst thing was becoming someone who didn't need him at all." Tara nodded. "You didn't burn him. You just outgrew him. That's what kills men like that. They can't compete with peace." The next day, I was back in the studio, sorting through new design proposals. My assistant, Lydia, walked in holding her tablet. "You're going to want to see this," she said, smiling. She handed me the screen. It was an article from a business magazine titled, "When Silence Becomes Power, the Designer Who Reclaimed Her Name." The photo showed me standing in front of the Luma Studio sign, sunlight catching the gold lettering. The writer had interviewed some of my clients, all of whom talked about my creativity and leadership. None mentioned Nate. It wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. No public shaming, no angry exposé. Just quiet success speaking louder than any confrontation ever could. By the end of the week, even more offers poured in. Invitations to conferences, design collaborations, mentorship programs. My name was finally standing on its own, unchained from anyone else's. Then one afternoon, as I was reviewing sketches for a hotel project, an email popped up from a familiar address. Nate. Subject: "Congratulations on the event. Elise, I've been thinking a lot about what you said. You were right, I didn't see you. I was so obsessed with control that I forgot who helped build everything I had. Watching you last weekend reminded me of the woman I should have been proud of all along. I hope you can forgive me someday. You deserved better than me. Nate." I read it twice, then minimized the screen. Not out of anger, just clarity. He wanted forgiveness because it would make him feel lighter. But forgiveness isn't something you hand out to clean someone else's conscience. It's something you keep to protect your own. I walked outside, the afternoon sun warm on my skin. Across the street, a muralist was painting a wall big, sweeping colors, no outlines, just freedom. It made me smile. There was something poetic about building beauty over old surfaces. When I got home that evening, I opened a new document on my laptop. The title came to me instantly, "The Woman He Tried to Hide." It wasn't a memoir. Not exactly. More like a collection of lessons: the art of starting over, the strength in silence, the grace of not needing to prove anything. I wrote for hours, not out of bitterness but gratitude. Every line felt like a small piece of freedom taking shape. By midnight, I closed the laptop, poured another glass of wine, and leaned back. Outside, the stars hung low and steady over the desert. I thought about how people use the word revenge like it's supposed to be loud, messy, and cruel. But the best kind isn't any of those things. It's quiet, steady, patient. It's walking into a room that once humiliated you and realizing you've turned it into your stage. And that's what the gala had been, my stage. Not for revenge, but for truth. For reclaiming the part of me he tried to shrink. In the end, I didn't need to destroy his image. I just needed to build mine. It didn't happen overnight. Men like Nate don't crash all at once. They unravel quietly, thread by thread, until one day there's nothing left holding the image together. A few weeks after the gala, rumors started circulating in the business community. It began with whispers, missed deadlines, a few clients pulling out, a minor PR mishap. Then came the headlines. Summit Veil faces internal audit over expense mismanagement. It wasn't a scandal yet, just a hairline crack in the glass, but I knew how cracks worked. They spread. Tara sent me the article with a single message. Karma's got good timing. I didn't respond. I didn't even smile. It wasn't satisfaction. I felt it was recognition. The man who built his world on perfection had finally met the one opponent he couldn't manipulate, truth. A few days later, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Elise, it's Nate. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but please pick up if I call. I didn't. Then came the call anyway. I let it ring. Twice. Then again the next morning. Finally, I answered mostly out of curiosity. His voice was strained. Nothing like the calm executive tone he used to perform in interviews. Elise, he said. I didn't know who else to talk to. I didn't say anything. Just waited. He exhaled. The board's investigating me. Someone reported improper spending and conflict of interest. They're saying I misused company funds for personal travel. You mean like those business trips to Aspen and Chicago? I asked. He paused. I wasn't the only one doing it. They're just making me the face of it. That's ironic, I said. You always did love being the face of things. He tried to laugh, but it came out flat. Elise, please. You don't have to rub it in. And I'm not, I said quietly. I just don't know what you want me to do. I just thought maybe you'd understand how this feels. I actually laughed at that one. You hid me for years because you thought I didn't fit your image. Now that your image is falling apart, you think we're equals? He didn't respond. Just silence. The kind that makes you realize how far apart two people can really be. Finally, I said, You'll survive, Nate. You're good at pretending. And then I hung up. After that, the calls stopped. 2 weeks later, the story broke fully. Summit Veil released a statement confirming Nate's resignation to pursue other opportunities. Translation: they'd forced him out before the investigation became public. Brianna's name appeared once apparently she'd filed a formal complaint about workplace misconduct months earlier. The same woman he'd chosen over me had ended up being the one to expose him. Life's poetic sometimes, just not in the way people imagine. I was sitting in my studio when one of my clients came in holding a magazine. You see this? She said, flipping it open. There he was, my ex-husband, looking smaller than I remembered. The headline read, From Power to Fallout, The Rise and Fall of a CEO. I scanned the article briefly. His former colleagues talked about his ambition, his obsession with image, his lack of balance. No one mentioned his marriage. Not one line about the wife he'd erased. It was as if I'd never existed, which, in a strange way, was fitting. That was his choice all along. When the client left, I sat alone for a while, thinking about how quiet justice can be. It doesn't always show up with noise or applause. Sometimes it's just a soft shift, the balance returning to where it should have been. Later that evening, I went for a walk through the plaza downtown. The shops were closing. The air smelled faintly of rain. I passed a bookstore window and saw something that made me stop. The magazine that featured me on the cover sitting right next to the one featuring him. Side by side, designing piece next to The Fall of a CEO. I stood there for a long moment, not out of pride, but reflection. Life has a sense of humor, doesn't it? When I got home, there was a small box waiting by my door. No note, just my name written in neat handwriting I recognized immediately. Inside was a gold bracelet, the one I'd left behind years ago when I packed my bags. Underneath it was a short card. "You were always the better half. I just wasn't man enough to see it." No signature. He didn't need one. I closed the box, placed it on a shelf, and turned off the lights. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't keep it close either. Some memories don't deserve to be worn. They just need to rest quietly where they can't hurt you anymore. Over the next few months, Summit Vale faded from headlines. Nate relocated somewhere out east, according to mutual acquaintances. Someone said he was starting over. I wished him well, silently, because peace isn't about revenge, it's about release. Meanwhile, Luma Studio kept growing. I started hosting workshops for women who wanted to rebuild: artists, designers, single mothers, divorcees. We talked about confidence, independence, the power of reclaiming your narrative. I watched those women find their footing, one by one, and I realized that what started as survival had become purpose. One afternoon after class, Tara looked at me and said, "You know, you're finally free of him." I smiled. "No," I said softly. "I've been free for a while. He's just catching up." The wind picked up outside, scattering leaves across the porch. I looked out the window and thought about all the years I spent trying to fit into someone else's version of perfect. It was exhausting, constantly shrinking myself so someone else could stand taller. Now, I didn't need anyone's approval, least of all his. The story had ended exactly where it should have, not with destruction, but with peace. And somewhere in Denver, I imagined him reading one of those articles about me, realizing too late that the woman he'd hidden had built a life brighter than his spotlight ever was. It's strange how peace can be so quiet you almost don't notice it arrive. It doesn't knock. It doesn't announce itself. It just settles into your life one day, and you realize you've stopped looking over your shoulder. Months passed, and everything about my days felt different now. Mornings weren't filled with rushed phone calls or silent breakfasts. I'd open the windows of my small Santa Fe home, let the sunlight spill in, and make coffee while the desert breeze carried the smell of sage through the air. The peace wasn't loud, it was steady. Luma Studio had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. We moved from a small room above a bookstore into a full workspace, a bright, open loft filled with women who reminded me of myself at different points in my life. Some were designers, some were rebuilding careers, some were just trying to remember who they used to be. I started a mentorship program called Rebuild and Rise. Every Thursday evening, we'd gather with wine and music, sketching ideas, and talking about life. No grand speeches, no self-help talk, just real stories about survival and the quiet art of starting over. One night, one of the younger women, Maya, said, "How do you stop being angry at someone who broke you?" I thought for a second and said, "You don't stop being angry. You just outgrow the version of yourself that needed their approval. Then one day, you realize you haven't thought about them in months." She smiled softly. "So peace is the revenge?" "Exactly," I said, "and it's the only kind that lasts." After that evening, those words stuck with me. Peace was my revenge, not because it hurt him, but because it healed me. A few weeks later, I got an invitation in the mail. A gold-embossed envelope with elegant lettering, the Women in Business Awards, Denver, Colorado. At first, I almost didn't open it, but then I read the fine print. I'd been nominated for Innovator of the Year for Luma Studios' community work. I smiled, shaking my head at the irony. Denver. The same city I once left behind like a wound that wouldn't heal. Tara insisted on coming with me. "We're getting you a new dress, something that says, 'I built an empire out of your silence,'" she declared. The night of the ceremony, I stood in front of the mirror, wearing a deep blue gown, simple but strong. No flash, no glitter, just confidence. I hadn't seen that version of myself in a long time. When we arrived at the venue, it took me a second to realize where we were. The ballroom was the same one where Nate's company used to host its annual galas. The chandeliers, the polished floors, the very same stage. But this time, I wasn't on the outside looking in. I was on the guest list. The event was beautiful, elegant, understated, exactly the kind of night he would have wanted to control, and for a brief second, I wondered if he knew I was here. The thought didn't sting anymore. It just drifted by and disappeared. When they announced my name as the award recipient, I walked onto the stage, the sound of applause filling the room. Not the kind of applause that feeds egos, but the kind that comes from genuine respect. I took the microphone and said, "This award isn't about building something new. It's about remembering who you were before someone told you who you had to be." The room went quiet, and for the first time, I felt seen not as someone's wife, not as someone's story, but as myself. After the ceremony, a few reporters asked for photos. As I posed, I noticed a familiar face near the back of the crowd. Nate. He wasn't part of the event. He was just there, standing by the door, hands in his pockets, watching quietly. Our eyes met for the first time in months. He didn't try to speak. He just nodded, as if to say, "I finally see it." I gave a small nod back, then turned toward the camera. Because some goodbyes don't need words, they just need a final glance that says, "You can go now." That night, back at the hotel, I sat on the balcony, looking over the city lights. The air was cold, but calm. Tara was inside, talking about champagne and midnight snacks, but I just sat there, letting the moment breathe. A year ago, I'd thought revenge meant proving him wrong. Now I knew it wasn't about him at all. It was about proving myself right, that I was never the invisible one. He just didn't know how to look. Before bed, I opened my laptop and started writing again, adding one last line to my document from months ago. He hid me out of shame. But I built myself out of silence, and peace was my revenge. The next morning, I left Denver without looking back. The city didn't feel heavy anymore, it was just another place on the map. Back in Santa Fe, the studio lights glowed softly through the windows. Inside, the walls were filled with sketches, laughter, and life. As I walked through the space, one of my new interns looked up and said, "Morning, Miss Harper. You look happy." I smiled, picking up a paint sample from the desk. I am. Because in the end, happiness isn't about who sees you, it's about what you see when you finally stop living in someone else's shadow. And as the sunlight stretched across the studio floor, I realized something simple but absolute: he had spent years hiding me, but I had turned that invisibility into my canvas. And this piece was my masterpiece. If you've ever lived through husband betrayal and found your way back to yourself, you already know, the quiet kind of strength lasts the longest. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and join our community of women who turn heartbreak into power. There are more real-life cheating stories and revenge stories ahead, each one a reminder that peace isn't weakness. It's victory told softly.